All right, hello and welcome to the Townwide Budget Balancing Committee meeting of Thursday, January 23rd, 2025. The first order of business is to approve minutes from our last meeting, but we just realized those were not yet sent out to all the members, so we're going to postpone that till next time. So let's just dive right into the FY26 budget development discussion. So Jeff, do you want to lead us through that?
Sure. So I'll walk through the documents that I sent out to you, and then we'll, with the governor putting out the budget and the cherry sheet updates, I'll kind of switch over to an updated document that will show some of the other numbers. So obviously we had a little bit of positive news on that front, it looks like, but just going forward with the budget, again, kind of a standard slide in there. Budget challenges, as Mr. Mizuko's mentioned a few times, in a good year, our revenue growth is 3 to 4%. Prop 2.5 limits the levy increase to 2.5%, and obviously economic development and new growth is our other sources of major revenue. Expenditures, this is a big one, and again, it's been said before, municipalities have a little lag in inflation. We are certainly seeing that across the board. Obviously, there's a number of increase in cost, increase in delays in getting equipment, materials, so that will all factor into what we're proposing going forward. Just this will be the slide, again, I'll clean this up, but this will be the slide that will go in the budget book. Just wanted to set the table, so after town meeting in October, we're sitting on $20,652,677 of free cash. So new growth, we did go over this with the FinCom the other night, but our numbers came in for 2025, $1,080,518. You can see that's slightly above the 5-year average and somewhat in line with 90% of the 3-year average. I think they're looking ahead, and as we mentioned to FinCom, obviously FM Global is probably the biggest construction project in town, so we'll pick up some new growth in that next year. There are a couple of residential developments as well that we're working on. So again, we've kept that number in 900 for right now, which we'll go through in a minute, but it's in line. Again, it's up for discussion in terms of what we want to do with that new growth, but certainly 900,000 is probably the right number to maintain going forward. So again, this was is something that was asked for as kind of our by source revenue budget. I don't want to go through all of this. We'll go through the local receipts, which are obviously the ones that we probably have the most play in or the most strategy to kind of put forth. But this was like I said, document that was asked for. It gives us the line item. There's a lot of stuff here that the accounting team still does in terms of reconciling some of these numbers. A lot of the current or year-to-date numbers, those may not be in the actual proper categories, but by the end of the year, we will be.
Can you scroll up to the top of this, if you wouldn't mind, Jeff? So I wanted to make sure I understood what I was looking at, the column labels on this. So the budget is how much revenue we budgeted to be coming in FY25, and then year-to-date expended is actually year-to-date collected. Correct. Because these are okay. Correct. And then the balance is like what we're still expecting.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And remember, Munis is one of those systems. Negative numbers are positive, so
yeah. Okay.
Revenue, so it gets a little tricky.
Just wanted to make sure I understood.
So again, that was a number of pages. Scroll down, go through that, and then the next was our local receipts. So this is something that I took a little time going through. I think, as I mentioned to FinCom, typically municipalities are looking at 90% of the previous year's collections. That's kind of a standard methodology. Again, I think we've looked at some of these numbers, and that's probably not the right way to go on all of those. So happy to go through each one of these, but you can see for the most part, I kind of took that 90% of 3-year average, and that was kind of my baseline for a lot of these. Meals, room, and jet fuel, again, 3-year average. Not taking the 90% of that because the trend supports a higher number. If you look at, we'll just take meals, for example, $1,035,000 collected in 24, our 25 budget was $850. So if we take the 3-year average, that brings it up to $954. I still think that's relatively conservative because you're building in 2 older years in that 3-year. But again, open for suggestions there. Yes, sir.
I had asked for the actuals that you have there. First, the number we used that we budgeted for last year and used in creating the budget. Can we get that number?
That's this whole document right here, so is that what you're looking for? So in terms of our I'll go through, so real estate property tax, we 107,952, 315. Obviously, that's all taxes. Let me try to find another one that's,
But Jeff, if you just go back to your sheet, I think I can point out to a certain extent what Bill's looking for. So, for instance, take room excise, this is what we budgeted, this is our physical collection, sorry, everyone's right here. This is what we budgeted, this is physically what we collected, this is what we're projecting. So these are the actuals for 23 and 22, and remember, meals and rooms with COVID and all that, it's time to recover. We projected 1.15 in the budget, we actually received the prior year 1.5, projection is 1.29. We can play with that number however way you want.
Right.
But what we
But
don't
that's the
have
number
there
that's the number
is-
I'd like to see.
Right, what we don't have there is the FY24 budget against the FY24 actuals.
Right.
I think is that what you're looking for, Bill?
Is it correct, Bill, that's what you're looking for? Okay, we can add that in.
so you want the FY24, the budget, and then the actuals. So
Just to see how far off we were, like what.
This
right,
same
To
report?
see like how
Yeah,
close
well,
we
say we're
were.
using like
Yeah,
90% or 80%, whatever, how close are we to
Yeah.
that number? That's not gonna be a big number, it's not gonna save our budget, but I'd like to know how good we are.
yeah, no, it's fair.
Bill, just to clear, so this report is what you're looking for, but for 24, so it will show a full year budget, full year collected.
Even last year.
Yeah.
Don't want you to have to do too much work, but I wanna get a grasp of how well we're doing.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of how other towns do this, Jeff, do they use averages, whether it's 3 or 5 year average, or do they just use the last full year, where you actually have a number and use that as the basis for?
Yeah, yeah,
This year.
can't speak for all, but, some of the items that I see coming through the various listservs is, 90% of last year, or the
Yeah.
prior year, so.
Yeah, as opposed to the average, yeah, okay.
Well, but you gotta be careful with certain categories, building permits is an example.
I know that, yeah,
Meals and,
right,
Those hotels
excise
is a
tax
little
and
bit more
meals and ambulance and all that, usually, but, yeah.
we always caution with excise tax, it's a little bit more volatile. Like if our meals tax number changes
Yeah.
by $500,000,
Yeah.
that's a serious issue. Like something significant has happened there. Excise tax, you buy that car, it's a $500 bill, whatever it happens to be, it drops dramatically. That can vary a lot more than meals and hotels, we can be a little bit closer to.
Yeah, I mean, using an average probably gives you, for lack of a better term, a safer number.
Yeah. I would
So,
agree.
right, and we did talk at, when we did our presentation at Fall Town Meeting, we did talk about the areas in which our revenues in local receipts came in significantly higher than our estimates, and because that was part of our conversation about what was the source of all this free cash. And so we have looked at it, but it's just not, it doesn't happen to be that column there. But it is an issue that, well, and everybody has this issue, right? That when you're doing your FY26 proposal, FY25 is not yet complete. And so you have to go back to FY24 and 23 and 22.
Yeah, and as we said, things like meals and rooms, they're a little bit more stable. They're not subject to one large project throwing it all off.
And when I did most of this, back in December, it was looking at what we've collected for this year as well, too. So there's a little bit of behind the scenes, okay, this is justified.
Right.
Just some highlights, ambulance revenue, that's up a little bit more. Again, that's been trending up, as we all know. So I did take a 3-year average, and I put a 5% escalator in for the recent trend. Still gets us to, a slight increase year over year. Fairly comfortable with that. Our licenses and permits, again, this is the one we've had all the building permits in 23 and 24. That is very slow year to date. We are under 50%. So again, changing that number is probably not the smartest. If anything, you might want to decrease that a little bit. But and then investment income is the other one. So obviously we've 23 and 24, we had great years. We had a lot of money in the bank, so we were able to take advantage of the interest rates rising. What I've done for that is I've worked with the treasurer, and we've kind of looked at our cash collection and expenditures on a monthly basis. We're fairly comfortable that on an average we'll have $50 million in the bank throughout the year. Looking at where the Federal Reserve is for 25, they're projecting 2 more cuts, maybe down to 3.25%, 3%. So again, $50 million in the bank for the full year at 3%. That's how I came up with the 1.5, nice round number.
And when you're talking about that 50 million, that's just our regular operating budget, the amount of money that is kind of sitting in our, sort of our, the equivalent of my personal checking account,
Correct.
right?
It's all the
It's
tax
not,
revenue, it's tax revenue that's coming in, obviously excise revenue is coming in now, so, you know, it will ebb and flow throughout the months, but that's kind of what we've looked at on the average.
right, and that's not assuming any money from the Coakley.
Those proceeds will all be exhausted.
Yeah.
The majority will be, obviously, we'll have a small piece left over, but again, I think what, 8 to 10 million, somewhere around there.
Like any small business, we take cash in, we spend it out.
course.
So we have our, to your point, we have our checking account, and that's based on what's in our checking account.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more complicated than that, but for all intents and
I
purposes.
certainly hope so.
Yeah.
When we hired Jeff, I was convinced he could handle the town finances differently than I handle my personal finances.
You'd be surprised it's not all that different. But I mean, one of the examples I always give people, on July 1st, we have no cash. We do. We, of course, have a ton of cash, but we've taken no revenue in for July 1st. July 10th, we're issuing paychecks, we're issuing, so we have no revenue that we've collected. We collect taxes quarterly. There's cash in the bank, it all balances out. We're fortunate that our cash flow is not a problem. There are a lot of towns where they have to manage their cash flow very, very carefully, and it's a concern whether at the end of the month, like, do we have enough money to make payroll? We're fortunate because we have enough revenue streams coming in. We don't have that problem, knock on wood, and we haven't for quite some time.
So just, I know Medicaid we're gonna talk about, but again, banking on 350, again, that's kind of been the trend. Seems to be a good number to go with. So all in all, you'll see an increase in local receipts. Again, I think it's justifiable based on kind of the methodology we went through to come up with these numbers. But happy to answer any questions or dig in further.
Yeah, this is one of the things we really wanted to talk about because, as we said, the real estate taxes go up 2.5% plus new growth. The state numbers, they just come up from the cherry sheet. There's nothing we can do about that. This number is, there's some discretion involved in what number do we pick here. And so we want to make sure that this group is comfortable with these numbers, understands where these numbers are coming from. FinCom did look at these numbers last week. We felt comfortable with that. Teresa, I believe you're still on the call, but we can't see you right now, so if you have any questions or anything, please just speak up.
Okay, thanks, Maya.
Thanks.
Okay, moving on.
And
Let
just,
me- I'm gonna
before we move on, just,
Yeah,
I
sure.
know we've discussed it before, but when we project local receipts, if we're wrong and we collect more, which we should, it just becomes free cash. If we're wrong and we don't collect enough, that eats away at our free cash. So sometimes it's easy to say, hey, we think we can project another $100,000. If we're gonna take that in, that's great. If we're not gonna take it in, it just eats away at the free cash. But we never lose the money. It finds its way into the budget somewhere. So it's not if we say, well, let's be conservative and book $1.8 million in building permits, that if we get 3.9, that money becomes free cash. So that's always the balance of, how risky do we want to be? We always collect the money. If we charge people, we take the charge in. But it's a balance about how risky we want to be. DOR doesn't let us get too crazy with what our projections are. So if we're taking in $3 million in building permits and we want to say, we're going to take $9 million in this year, they're going to say, well, show us what that's based on. And if we can't prove that, they'll sort of tell us, you really realistically can't do that. They don't fight us too much over if police details have been historically 130 grand and we raised it 5%, we make it 135. They won't fight us on that. But we can't just say, no, we're going to make $29 million in pilots when we've never made anything remotely near that before.
And I mean, DOR has traditionally allowed you to use the last full year of collecting fees, unless you have evidence to the contrary. As an example, you're raising ambulance fees. You could charge a little bit more for, put a little bit more for ambulance fees because you're going to be getting a little bit more, because you're charging more.
Sure, or you create a new fee, you create a charge, something, you say, look, we're gonna take $200,000 in for this because we've established a fee of X dollars per Y. They'll let you do that, but they don't let you just make it up as you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point, Alan, because they will question us on most of the increases
Yeah.
as well. We'll have the annual meeting and they'll go
Yeah.
through just what's your justification for that. So that's why it's always a little bit
Always
more
good to be
conservative, but
conservative.
to have some sort of methodology behind it as
Yeah.
well. All right, I'm going to switch over to a new presentation, not the one I sent out. So on the screen, this is with the updated cherry sheet that we got this morning. Like I said earlier, some good news there. Obviously, Chapter 778 was increased by $1.1 million. Tuition reimbursement up a little bit. Subtotal of all education, 1.3 million more. Subtotal of all government, general government didn't get that big of an increase, but there is a slight increase proposed. So our total cherry sheet is up 1.5 million, 6.7%. On our assessments, again, somewhat, I guess, less than expected, so that's good news. But our assessments are going up 387,000 total. You can see the list here. So overall, our net increase on the cherry sheet is 1,175,544. Again, that's in the governor's proposal, so that will be going through iterations. We'll keep updating this as that comes
So is
in.
that saying 5.65%?
Correct.
Okay, so that's nice that it's going up
Yeah.
more than like our personal property tax and stuff like, or
On
real
the
estate
schools,
tax.
does the state give anything for special transportation?
Circuit breaker. So we do get part of our circuit breaker when the Student Opportunity Act went
Yeah.
into effect. We get reimbursed for
Through that?
transportation. First, do you know circuit breaker? It's the state funding for high-cost special education placements. They fund the out-of-district tuition and the in-district costs, and once they achieve that, then they move to the transportation. So
But
we
this-
get about 280,000, I think.
This does not include circuit breaker reimbursement.
No.
This is separate from that.
That's-
So
this is
additional
like-
funds that will come from reimbursement for that.
Cherry sheet's usually like direct to the town revenue. We have other sources that we get from the state, like circuit breaker, that goes straight to the school district.
And just to that point, where it says that veterans benefits went up $50,000, that means we're spending more based on projections. So it looks like we've gained $50,000. We really haven't. It's just their projection based on what we've been spending. They're going to reimburse us the 75% of the Chapter 115 program. So it looks like it's 50 extra grand. It doesn't mean that. It means we're spending more money. And they adjust that on a monthly basis based on our actual numbers. So if we spend zero, we don't get any of that. But it also means we had no expense.
But the Chapter 70 money for the schools, the 6.8%, I think is the Chapter 70 is based on the enrollment numbers have gone up, the complexity of the students, including special ed students and whatnot. So.
Okay, so next is kind of getting into where our budgets are. This is just, again, the codes. Tony and I met, and we kind of came in with our updated town budget. You'll see in the next couple slides we'll go with that, but this is kind of just putting us where we are all together. 5.74% for the town, 8.1% for the schools. That has been updated into here. So right now, if everything is as projected, we have roughly an $8.4 million deficit that we're looking at. So structural deficit of less than $10 million that we were talking about. Obviously, the Chapter 70 money helped that out. But again, so the town's up 5.74%, schools are up 8.1%.
Jeff and I don't know if I'm still seeing you advance the slides. I still see the history of local receipts.
Oh, I think, yeah, you'd need to share this
Oh, that's right.
spreadsheet.
You have to stop sharing that one and share the other one you're on.
I thought I could just switch. So what do I do? Stop presenting that
I
one?
see you moving your cursor, and I'm like, what you're pointing at is very different numbers than what you're saying.
If you go to the share
Then
button
go to
again,
present, yeah,
This
share.
one?
Yeah.
and now go to window, now grab that one.
Yeah, this one, okay, sorry.
Thank you for letting us know, Teresa.
I'm a novice at this, so just yell at me.
I lost her again.
She's still there, she can see.
All right, so here's the spreadsheet that I was talking about. Just gives all the categories.
Now, when we're talking about this basically deficit, right, that we don't have enough money, it also, it's not just about, we need to dive deeper into that shared cost number, and we've said this before, and I think you in one of your other spreadsheets, it was broken up that
Next
facilities was a separate thing, right?
You wanna go to
And
that
then
slide?
some of the, yes, that'd be great. Some of the shared costs are truly, like, there's no discretion. We have to pay retiree, we have to pay into the pension, we have to pay health insurance. But some of them, there's more flexibility, the capital equipment, the compensated absences, and facilities is definitely discretionary, so we should look at those
So here's the
numbers.
shared cost breakdown, as Maya was mentioning. I did sort this one by percentage of the total shared cost budget. So again, health insurance, which we're projecting at 8%. Again, we have not heard anything to the contrary, positive, negative. Tony, we get that in February usually is kind of the first indication comes out.
Yeah, my concern is that might be the floor, not the ceiling for health insurance. Now, as everyone knows, we get a increase in the health insurance, and we then have to take that number and apply it to our plans, because sometimes the state will come out and say, great, health insurance is only up 7.2%. Well, it's up 4% on plans that we have nobody subscribed to, and up 18% of the plans we have 80% of our employees do. The state itself, for their GIC costs, are programming like a little over 10%. I wouldn't be surprised if it goes up more from that, but I think it's a good placeholder until we know. By the 10th of February, we should know what it actually is. We should have the GIC numbers and be able to apply it to our plan. But bottom line, we're in that realm. That's not going to go to 2%.
No.
So it's there. It might get a little worse. Best case scenario, maybe it goes to 7 3/4, but it's not going to all of a sudden be 2 and save the day. Just FYI.
Right.
And this does not include any new employees. So this is kind of just it's an 8%. Again, that 8% may cover it, but it may not. So again, this will be a fluid number that we'll have to watch.
Okay.
Debt service, we haven't taken on any new debt, so we're paying that down. That's why that's down. Retirement pension looks like it's up. It will be up based on our memo from PERAC, which we expect in the next couple of weeks. But this also bakes in some of our indirect costs. This fully bakes in our retirement contribution. So the indirect costs on the other side, for the revenue side from the light department, water, sewer, that offsets this overall cost on the revenue number. Again, facilities, expenses, salaries, like I said, there's not really, much of the other stuff is, capital, that's the stuff that's in the budget that has been in there for a while. Various departments are able to rotate their fleet. Always good to keep that in, not great to cut that out and then you start getting into big costs down the road.
Yeah, I wasn't proposing we get rid of
Yeah,
it. I was
no.
just saying,
No, exactly.
acknowledging that
It's-
there's more flexibility
yeah.
there. We could,
It's the
say
easiest one
like,
to look
let's
at.
add an extra truck or let's remove one car.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, any other questions on the shared cost breakdown? Okay, so moving on to the next, again, this is, there's a lot of stuff on here. This is kind of what you're used to seeing. So our fiscal year 25, updated new growth, that gives us our prior year levy limit. New growth of 2.5% increase in property taxes with our new growth at 900 in there. Our total property tax levy is up 3.1%. All these non-property tax revenues are also updated based on the sheets you've seen previously. So our total revenue is up 1%. Again, I've highlighted these two cells in yellow. Override stabilization and free cash, which we used last year, currently not proposed to use any. But obviously that's up for discussion.
Well, although in the override stabilization fund, didn't we leave about $10,000?
Yeah, we've earned some interest again, because I didn't move that over right away, so that's earned some interest. So there's about 100,000 in there, just to keep the account open.
Yeah, okay, but it's still
For
not gonna
future
like
use, it's not gonna-
solve our problem.
It's not.
Why have you got nothing in stabilization, override stabilization?
Was
We
we used
used it
most
all
of
last year.
Use it all.
Other than a de minimis amount.
As I mentioned, so we updated the general government budget, so you'll see the 5.74%, schools 8.11, facilities are up 3.75. I just did put a little number here, so if anybody's looking at it, what 1% increase, decrease, what it may mean for the town, it's 434,000, schools 661,000, facilities would be 92,000. It's just kind of in the back of your mind if people are looking to see where we want to go moving forward.
Okay, you be sending us a copy of
I'll
this
update-
new
I'll
updated
Yeah,
one?
I'll update the sheet the presentation I sent out last week I guess last week.
Full cherry sheets just came out earlier today.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, we've got them, yeah.
Okay.
So
So the
Jeff,
shared cost, it gives you, here's our note, gives us back to that 8.4.
so total revenues are up about 1%. Well, revenues are up by more than 1%, but when you consider that last year we added to our revenues with free cash and override stabilization. So if you compare what we used as our income side on the FY25 budget and the actual revenues that we're projecting for FY26, it looks like we're looking at a 1% increase on the plus side of the ledger. And on the negative side of the ledger, even before the general government, school department, or facilities budget, just the shared costs alone are up like more than that increase, right? Like, I mean, that shared cost isn't really the right number because that includes facilities.
Correct.
So the question is, like, if we're just looking at health insurance and pensions and all that, you know, how much is that up?
5.16%.
Right. So that basically eats up. So I think what I'm trying to say is, I think if we didn't put in any free cash, any one-time monies into this budget, we could maybe afford to level fund general government schools and facilities. Like, you know, how,
Say it again?
what I want to know is, like, if we did this the old way we used to do it, where we said, like, let's start with no free cash added to the budget.
Take away the fixed costs.
Take away the fixed costs and say, like, what's left and how much, you know.
I would get about $9 and Tim would get 12.
That's what I'm
Like,
thinking,
there's
right?
something-
That's what I'm trying to figure out. What is that number? Like,
we can get you the specific number, but it's next to nothing. I mean, Prop 2.5 is gonna get us maybe 3 million. Health insurance is probably up 2.5 million just in and of itself. And we're not, the health insurance is killing us, but that's the same everywhere. So that 8 to 10 to 12% is happening everywhere. But to your point, we can get the exact number, it's de minimis. We'd be a 1/10% above the prior year's cash number.
right. So I guess maybe what I'm looking at is,
Basically be level funded.
maybe this would be easy to
So level
calculate.
funded, but we always
How
gotta make
much?
sure we understand that level funded is still a cut to what we have. I would call it cash level funded, not service level funded.
Definitely.
Not to sound like
Yeah.
a bureaucrat and say
No,
there's
no,
a
no.
difference.
No, we get,
And I think
there's
that's
a difference.
important.
Yeah, we
Right.
have the same cash amount we have last year, but we have fixed costs that go up within our budgets. We have COLAs, and I know every now and then somebody likes to say, well, just don't give raises here and there. That might be a one-time solution at some point in time, but when you don't give out a small cost of living adjustment, 1%, 2%, 3%, at some point that catches up to you, and we never have 9%. Right, we're looking to go up at 6% just to keep us balanced and add a couple of positions for the Coakley, and it's 6 or 7%. There's no year where it's like, hey, great year, everyone, we can give everyone 10% raises to make up for the 4 years we didn't. It just never happens.
Yeah, but then again, I mean,
And Tim's promised me he'll find a way to make that happen, but you know.
and we'll hold them to that. But again, looking at the numbers, Jeff, looking at the amount of revenue we generate, and looking at the increases in fixed costs. Again, you know, health insurance, I've seen health insurance is almost a zero increase in some years. We're not expecting that in the near future, but, so you're gonna get a significant increase in health insurance, you get retirement. It's eaten up, just those two by itself, almost all our revenue.
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah. So, you know, the numbers that you're showing us now with preliminary budgets, we're looking at $8.5 million of free cash to fund that. We do have that money sitting in the bank, but next year, we'd be looking at least that much, and probably what, it was like more like 10 million next year, right? So if we spent free cash on nothing else, which isn't gonna happen, right? Then we could fund this year and next year, and then we'd have a huge fiscal cliff.
Yeah, so I just put up on the screen, so this is the 5-year projection that,
Yeah.
again, you're used to seeing, so here's our 8.4, next year that goes to 9.8, right off the bat.
And following
Yeah.
that, you're looking for 11.
Yeah, could you go back up one half a slide?
Sure. This one?
We're looking at, town costs and school costs and facilities costs, wherever that's located.
There it is.
Bingo. Because if you look at between FY '25 and '26, towns going up, what'd you say, 5.7, the schools are going up 8.1, I believe. But then you go to like 26 or 27, 27 and 28, et cetera, you're only, and again, it's all a numbers game, but you're only assuming a 4% increase. And given the trends we've seen in the school department in the last few years, particularly when we've had some excessive costs due to special education, can you really count on a 4% increase in subsequent years? I don't know if that's, I don't know whether we can make that assumption. It's, you look at debt service as an example. Debt service is going down significantly, that's because you're not adding any more debt, which we know is not going to happen. We know we're going to be getting increases in the capital budget every single year, which is going to affect the debt number, which we see. So it's not going down from almost 4.9 to 3.7. It's going to probably be pretty close to the 4.9, if not even more than that, which adds to the deficit we're seeing in the bottom number.
Sure, I would agree. If I could add a couple things, and I'll have Jeff chime in. A couple things. I know that we've always advised that inflation hits us a little bit later than it hits the general economy and hits people's general pocketbook a couple of years later. So right off the bat, you say, oh my God, the prices in the grocery store are up 5 or 6%. What's happening in the town budget? Generally, nothing. And then a couple of years later, it sometimes comes back, sometimes with a vengeance. We'll lock in a fuel contract at a 2% escalator at X dollars, and then all of a sudden that next contract, because the vendors have to make up for it, we're going up 10, 12, 14%. So we're seeing a little bit of that. Our general cost of living and collective bargaining agreements, school, town, it's all the same. They tend to trend towards the economy. So as you've seen surging house prices, you've seen surging inflation and whatnot, those tend to be higher. We're not in a recession. Where we'll be in a couple of years, who knows? If the economy keeps going at the pace it's going, I can't predict where that's going to go. So we're seeing some of those costs built in. We do have the Coakley opening next year. I know some of the costs, correct me if I'm wrong, in Tim's budget, are that the Coakley's opening. We're not opening a Coakley more than once. So, there's some increase there based on that. So do I think you're half correct, I would say? Is 4% good? That's what we probably have to ultimately live with. Could it go up? We're not opening any more schools in a couple of years. We don't know where inflation is going to be.
We'll also be settled with our contracts for the next 2 years as well. We're finishing one negotiation this year, and then we're kind of free for a couple of years too, so there won't be changes there.
Yeah, and on the town side, we had we're in the middle, we're in the second year of a 3-year cycle. The way our compensation sort of hit, it was more in the middle year than the other years. You try to smooth it out the most you can, but sometimes it gets incredibly complicated that you can't perfectly smooth it out, that it's exactly 2.975% over the course of the 3 years. So
I mean, I get that, but
I wouldn't project more than 5%, because if you say, well, we're going to go up 5 or 6%, conveniently you're going to get a budget that always goes up 5 or 6%. But that's the target, is that 3 to 4 range.
I mean, I go back to what we just had a couple of years ago, when we had the pledge, which was 3.5% for each of the groups. With the understanding in the school side that when you had some special education costs, we threw that in on top of the 3.5%. So, I mean, I don't know what the number's supposed to be. I'm just pointing out that this is based on 4%, sure, and the recent trends have been somewhat higher than that.
I think that's valid. I always focus, in just going back to the override pledge, a headcount limitation is the best thing to do if you're looking at trying to control it, because we can pick a percentage at 3.5%. It's a very arbitrary number. We've seen trash as an example. Like, we realistically can't control that. If the school department has, we budget facilities as a shared cost. If electric rates go up 9%, how does that factor into the 3.7? We can't control that. The head count is where you are best able to control that. I would love to think that the school head count growth is going to slow. This year they're adjusting for the Coakley, and for anyone who thinks that the town manager just tells the superintendent, sure, I'll find you the money, we beat Tim up all the time. Poor Sean came to a finance meeting a few weeks ago. I thought he was going to quit afterwards.
He hasn't been back though.
And he hasn't even met with the FinCom yet. Boy, then he's really
Superintendent called a meeting at the same time for the last 2 weeks.
Exactly. So it's not that we don't. So I think you're seeing a spike this year. I don't think anyone has any crazy plans to go crazy in the future. We should always be targeting 3 to 4%, because then that lets us talk with our labor partners, and it lets us talk with our department directors and say, hey, we're generally limited to 3 to 4% a year. Best case scenario, if we hit a recession, it's going to be less than that, but it's that 3 to 4% is where we are. So when you're thinking, hey, I want 15 new programs, great if you can fit that in within 3%. But your point is valid, well taken, and correct. But I think we're dealing with the Coakley and having to get the school open, and we want to make sure Margot has everything she needs. I mean, I think the world of Margot, she could do it with nothing. But all right, we want to give her what she thinks she needs to get the school open and running. We didn't build a $150 million school to not give it anything. It's Tim's sort of first budget cycle. We want to make sure he has the resources available to do what he thinks he needs to do to eventually drive those numbers down.
So the FinCom had a long conversation at our last meeting last week about our concerns about using one-time sources of money. And our financial policies on this are very clear, that one-time sources of revenue should not be used for operating expenses. That is, and it's our job as a FinCom to enforce the town's financial policies. And so the last few years, we have been recommending that we use free cash and the override stabilization fund. Now, the override stabilization fund was a little different because it was specifically set up to grow in the beginning and then shrink at the end, and we managed to stretch it out for 1, maybe 2 extra years beyond what we originally thought, so that was good. But the free cash in particular, we have been recommending that we use that with the justification that some of those expenses, we were saying, like, these are really one-time things, that there was like a significant growth in out-of-district special education, and we get paid for that, reimbursed for that in arrears, and so like we need to give them some more money to get through this year, and then they're going to get more more circuit breaker, and then they're going to, but every time we say that this is a one-time thing,
Something else comes up.
something else comes up. And so I think FinCom is going to have a very hard time going to town meeting and recommending that we put $8.5 million in to prop up this budget, knowing that there isn't an ongoing revenue source to support that.
I think that's valid, and I think it's a point well taken. One of the things that I think is important to remember, every town has a structural deficit. The fundamental challenge with Prop 2.5 is you're limited to that 2.5% increase, which is the bulk of your revenue, plus your new growth. In some years, we're going to have really good new growth in Norwood with redevelopment. We don't have 1,500 home subdivisions able to come into Norwood. And even when we see Lennox Street, there's a new apartment complex that goes somewhere, it's replacing an existing building, so the net tax benefit, unless it's big like FM's project, which we can talk about in a minute, is not necessarily there. When we did the override, we looked very comprehensively at our finances, and we said, we can guarantee no service cuts absent anything out of the ordinary. We had a pandemic and we got through it, but absent out of the ordinary, we will guarantee 5 years of no service reductions. We've now gotten that to 7 years. So there's a discussion about, no, we don't want to use free cash, but how long do we want to sort of extend that before we start reducing services, versus we're not structurally deficient because we've done something wrong or done something bad. It is the structure that we have. If I could sit in with all of my unions and say your salary will go up no more than 1%, we'd be perfectly fine. Jody, how does that sound to you? Right? Exactly. It's not going to happen, and it's not going to happen because nobody else is doing that. Right? When we look at, teachers getting 2-3% plus some other stuff in their contract, cops and firefighters are getting the same, we're no different than anywhere else. So we're not doing anything different than any other towns are doing. We don't always have the benefit of that new growth. So we did a 5-year override. We lasted those 5 years. We kicked it out 6 or 7 years. Do we kick it out additional years before we ask the taxpayers for more money? That's always a good benefit. We got to make sure we're not putting ourselves too far into the hole. But we've raised taxes. Values have gone up. We're doing what we can do, and we're doing it reasonably well. Do we not have enough money to fund our operations as they are? No, we don't. Fundamentally, we don't. No town does. Every now and then you have a little town here and there that doesn't fundamentally change. Our student population has changed dramatically in the last 10 years. And don't get me wrong, I tell Tim all the time, he's full of crap, that hasn't happened. But even I recognize it has happened, and that's the actual truth. Our fire calls are twice what they were 30 years ago, and our staffing is exactly where it was 30 years ago. So I mean, we face all these challenges. These aren't the best financial decisions, but are we trying to do the best in the interest of the employees who work hard for us, the taxpayers that we are trying not to, rake over the hot coals, versus not just leading ourselves to a bigger hole? I think we're doing the best we can. We have an unusual amount of free cash. Yes, it'd be perfect to put one-time money away for unforeseen expenses, but we're not paying our rent next year or our mortgage next year, so how do we put that money away? That's all to say there's no easy answer, and I can keep talking all night that I don't have an answer to your question of,
but you're giving me a very high-level answer, and I can't say that you're wrong about any of this high-level answer, but I will tell you that I think FinCom is going to want to dig deeper into all of these budgets this year and really see, why are we talking about more than almost 6%? Why are we talking about more than 8%? What is going on? What are the trends that we're seeing? What do we think this is going to look like going forward? I think that there's there's more here that we really,
And I think that's completely justified. If we were saying, hey, look at 1%, the town gets everything you need, the town, schools have everything, I think everyone would say, great, taxes are probably gonna go down. I think that's completely validated.
So I
We
just
owe that
wanna-
to the FinCom, we owe that to the taxpayers, we owe that to town meeting, we owe it to the selectmen and the school committee and everyone else to say, this is what we're trying to do and this is where we're
Right.
coming up with.
And historically with budget balancing hasn't gotten into the weeds. Like, they're not gonna go through Tim's budget and say, okay, you want 8.8%. If you take, this out and that out and that out, that'll bring you down to X, whatever it is. That's not the job of us. That's a job more the FinCom to do than budget balancing. Budget balancing may try to come up with a number,
Yeah.
and, we'll just go from there.
Sure, we're looking at that $8.5 million is where we are. Now, what's gonna change between now and, call it, 6 weeks from now? We will get a final health insurance number that could impact that. We will get a final pension number that could impact that. I don't anticipate state aid changing dramatically. The House and the Senate versions tend to, they fibrillate a little bit. It won't be all that, dramatic. The governor's claiming, once again, they're gonna try for, somebody might shut the mic off. They're gonna try for additional local taxes.
Teresa, you got some feedback, remute.
Sorry, you guys all of a sudden started breaking up a little bit. Did you say I could talk?
No, we're getting feedback from
Mute
you.
yourself.
Oh,
I'm not sure that was where the feedback was coming from, because it didn't feel like Teresa had
No,
changed
it was.
anything.
It was
Okay.
her thing was lighting up as we were talking.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So,
We'll call on you in just a minute, Teresa.
yeah, the state's claiming that they're gonna allow additional meals tax and additional this. We talked about that last year, that maybe that's gonna happen. Who knows? I'm not willing to project it at that point. So that all needs to happen. The next bright side that we have, and we know we're looking towards an override, I know folks have said, well, people need to be aware of that. I've been putting it in my budget message for probably 2 years, is that next year or is it the year after? Not this June 30th, but the following June 30th, we will have the full value of FM Global's new project built in. So next year might be the year to say we really need to do the override, but by this June 30th, which will impact next year's new growth numbers, we'll sort of have some of the FM Global growth, but the way that works is it's really a June 30th look, but we tend not to fight with companies to say, hey, give us everything as soon as possible. We sort of wait until the end, because if we fight them to give us everything as soon as possible, they're also going to fight us and say, well, on June 30th last year, we had torn down our building and we wanted abatement for $1 million, and we don't like to give money back to anyone. So not this June 30th, but the following June 30th, we're probably looking at $1 million, $2 million in new growth. I don't want to say $3 million, but at a $500 million construction cost, we are going to make sure they pay a fair amount of taxes. So that $11.5 million might grow, to Alan's point, to $13 million, with who knows where costs are going to go. But we know we're going to have some good new growth coming in from FM Global. The project is under construction. They won't have that much. They'll have a lot done. They won't have the building other than sealed up by June 30th.
You're
So
gonna come up with $8 million?
maybe in 2 years, no, not that much,
Okay.
but maybe in 2 years we'll be at 10 million, which is where we more or less are today.
Yeah, again,
Teresa?
oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm
Sorry, no,
yeah.
Teresa.
that's why it's hard to be remote when everyone else is in person. I initially put my hand up because I wanted to respond, Maya, to something that you were saying around, the financial policies and the sustainability. Because although I will always advocate for what the schools need, and I think the budget that Tim and Shauna put together is very justifiable, I am concerned about that too. And I don't want anything to happen for FY26 that then makes efficiency and effectiveness in FY27 harder to achieve. So that is something that I've talked about with the school committee and with our budget committee, and something that I agree with, why the FinCom is raising these concerns. But then on the other hand, if there is the money, and I think this is what Tony was saying, how do you justify possibly not using money, but then removing services? And
Right.
if I looked back at the override pledge that we committed to, I think there was a clause that said we would use all sources of revenue before we went for another override. Am I correct in that?
Yes, something roughly
Yeah,
along those lines.
that
yeah.
language, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just wanted to add those thoughts, but then I also want to say, Maya, you had said you would love to know a little bit more about, for the school side, why is it the 8.1? And I believe Sean and Tim are prepared to give some insight to that tonight with the presentation. And then I also just wanted to ask, is our goal by the end of tonight's meeting to come to some agreement, because the school committee is going to need a little bit more direction if we're staying at that 8.1 or if the expectation is to alter that.
Okay, so there's several questions. Let me just, you said, you were pointing out that I had said, like, that FinCom would like to know more about why the 8% and how. That was not a question for this evening. I was not in any way anticipating an answer tonight. What I was just saying is, like, look, we have a couple of meetings scheduled with you guys. I think that in order for FinCom to feel comfortable making a recommendation to town meeting that is against our financial policies, we're going to want to, trust but verify and really dig in and, like, convince ourselves that this is necessary, and I'm skeptical, is what I was trying to say. And then with regard to outcome of tonight's meeting, I think I did not expect that we would have any finalized numbers this evening, but I did think that, we're kind of taking everybody's pulse and getting a sense of where we're at.
Yeah.
Bob?
I would just like to point out to Teresa's point that Tony's first review of our budget is scheduled for Tuesday, so you're right. You couldn't make that decision because the selectmen haven't even had a chance to look at that budget as well.
Right.
As an FYI.
Yeah, Alan?
I just wanted to say, I understand Teresa's concerns, and I have some of the same ones. What I'm concerned about most is not FY26, because we'll find a way to do the FY26 budget. We get it. If there's money available, it's really difficult to cut services, particularly personnel. Just human nature, it's the reality. What I'm concerned about is when we have to go to the voters, whichever year that is. And if I'm a voter, and I know, here's Proposition 2.5, it's been around for what, 40 years? 40 some odd years?
Which was a terrible idea at the time it came out. We can have that discussion. And some of the history around it.
I
but
know
for
the
now,
history as well as you do, Tony. But having said that, if I'm, a town meeting member and a voter, and it's like, well, we get 2.5%, with a little more additional revenue and whatever, and you're going up almost 6%, you're going up almost 8%. I'm going to say, wait a minute, what am I doing here? And that's, to me, the question, when everything is said and done.
two thoughts sort of just generally in the theme. On the one hand, I agree with you, that's a hard argument to make. I keep trying to take vacation during town meeting and the selectmen won't let me. That being said, why are you going up 6 and 8%? I think there is a narrative around that. What hasn't gone up 6 and 8%? We're at a point in Norwood where most of our, call them entry level or frontline employees, cops, firefighters, and teachers, can no longer afford a home in Norwood. Mm-hmm. 10 years ago, that wasn't the case, and for the 100 years before that, that wasn't the case. Now, we cannot spend enough money to make that the case. Like, there's no 50% COLA that's coming. But when you think about where that has impacted just our employees, which is where our cost is, it's 80 to 90% our employees. Employees starting in Norwood as cops, firefighters, and teachers, chances are, unless their partner makes a significant amount, that makes at least what they make or a significant amount more, they will never afford a home in Norwood. Mm-hmm. That's a less than 10-year flip. That's substantial for us. Where has inflation gone the last several years, and where have we not seen it that is starting to sort of, come into our play? The problem we face is, inflation hits people and they say, geez, look, grocery prices are up 6%, they're up 7%, they're up 8%, interest rates are up 8%. The town needs to hold it to 3%. We're a business like anything else. We have costs coming in, and unfortunately, we're not the federal government, we're not the state government with programming budgets. It's people. So I think there's an argument to be made on that case that I think we can straight face the town meeting. Look, this is where we are. I don't think we're adding anything that's absurd. I don't think the schools are adding anything that's absurd. Tim and I are not getting Lamborghinis this year. We wanted them and we pulled them out of the budget. So that's not happening. I think we can make that argument. As for a decision point, I just encourage, do we wait 2 weeks until we know what the health insurance number is? Do we know what the pension number is? Just give us a few weeks. I'm just a little scared with health insurance. We know we're looking at probably $8.5 million. Now here's the thing, could we shave that down a little bit? I'm sure we could find a way to shave it down, bump up some local receipts, see what else is there. But what if health insurance is much worse than we anticipate? And that $8.5 million goes to $10.5 million. Well, we're shaving it down to more than what we're spending now. just time-wise, the next couple of weeks are critical for a few items.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I don't want us to lose our chance, our agenda, and give Sean a chance to share the information he planned to share. So Jeff, are you done with your presentation?
Yes.
Okay. Maybe we should move on and let the schools do their presentation. We can talk about that, and then we can continue this conversation.
Okay.
Let's see if I can figure out how to do this, Sean. Hold
All right.
on.
Tim, do you wanna give?
Yeah, so
Sure.
obviously, as Sean's pulling the slide, so
There you go.
we're looking at an 8.1% over last year. I think.
Teresa, can you see that? Sorry.
Oh, I don't think you're on the right one.
No? Okay, hold
Try it
on.
again.
No, you're still on yours,
Yeah.
Jeff.
I think just to preface it,
Stop.
the complexity of our student population and the increase in enrollments, just
Mhm.
alone by looking at the governor's proposed budget of 6.8% above where we were last year,
Oh, there you go.
aligns pretty much where we are, and we're opening up a new middle school as well, right? So all the positions that we had discussed prior with you, as well as a few others that we have as we've gone through the process, are included in this budget. There are transportation costs associated in this budget, 2 new school buses that we require for the opening of Coakley, as well as the possibility of a 10% increase in transportation costs due to the transportation bid. Go ahead.
I'm just sorry, those 2 new buses, not physically buying buses, contracting
Correct.
annually for 2
Yeah, it's
additional
part of-
buses.
Part of the
Yep.
bus bid that we.
Okay. Yep.
I'll let Sean kind of go through, if you want to do an overview, Sean, and I'll fill in as we go.
Sure.
But I do think that it is a reasonable budget based on where we are with the school now and the deficits that have been in place for times past. And recognizing that the town has given an incredible amount of money to the schools over the years. I don't want to shortchange that, but the increases here are to build a foundation so we do not have to increase in the future. So for example, things like special ed costs, there's reorganization things happening in here where the goal is to train staff and to provide those services in school so we don't have to send students out. To provide educational outcomes to students through professional learning of staff so we can ensure that kids are here and special ed is not the only game in town, so to speak. So there are foundations here to reduce in the future that have not been in place before.
Okay.
But with that, I'll have Sean kick off this part.
I think it's good.
It's because it's a tab, it wants to go picture in picture.
Thanks, Tim. So this is just an overview of the budget increase from FY25 to FY26. So increase of 11.6 FTEs. We'll show the detail on that. The FTEs will increase from about 573 to 585. This is just on the operating budget. And it's an 8.1% increase, as we said, which is just shy of $5 million. I think you have to go to the actual document, the window, the window. There you go. Okay.
Snap picture in picture.
So this kind of sums up the top level increases that are driving it. So of the 8.1%, 3.8% off the bat is all of our collective bargaining agreements, our step increases, our column transfers, our COLA increases. If we did nothing else but carry all of our staff forward, that would be 3.8% of the 8.1%. And then as Tim mentioned, transportation is an area, typically you find transportation there's a large increase maybe every 3 to 5 years. We have to bid out our yellow bus contract next year, so the Connolly yellow buses that we have, that is going out to bid right now actually. And often you see a large increase in the first year of the contract, so next year would be the first year of the 3-year contract. Ideally, we'd like to do 5-year contracts, but we need to go to town meeting to get the ability to do that, and we didn't have that ability this time around. But sometime in the future, it would be good to do 5-year contracts on transportation, which a lot of school districts do. In addition, we're finding it very hard to do our in-house transportation because the drivers and monitors, the labor market is very tight right now, and we need to increase our in-house rates. And lastly, we need to increase 2 buses for the middle school. So all of that makes transportation of 1.5% of the 8.1% increase. It's not, I wouldn't expect transportation to typically be the big cost driver, but next year that's the case. And then you can see that of the FTEs, 9.6 are just to open the new middle school. The superintendent, we've gone in detail at that at the school committee meetings. We could provide detail on exactly what those positions are. That's 1.2%. And then there are 2 additional staffing increases net that are on top of the middle school that are strategic increases that we've presented to school committee. All of that would be 6.9%. So if we just took that, the increase we'd be putting forward is 6.9%, and then everything else, which is really an amazing story when you think about out-of-district tuition and special education costs. Those are not increasing drastically next year. We're actually doing quite well. We're saving a little money from what we budgeted on out-of-district. If that had been a huge year next year where we have to, it's a very volatile area, increase that, we'd be over 8.1%. So we're saving on a lot of our other areas and arriving at the 8.1%.
And I will also share that this is a preliminary budget, right? And we are definitely still looking at it, looking at different ways to carve it down to the extent that we can and feel comfortable running the school system that's best for kids. I have already been working with the staff, the principals, and the administration to talk about how we have looked at positions in the past that maybe we haven't looked at before, right? To really determine if we have what we need, where we need it. We know that these increases are necessary. The questions are, other things that we have, are there things that we can transfer, can we shift? Are there things that we can do without sacrificing the educational services we provide for our kids? So that is an ongoing conversation that we had just yesterday, I think, so, and we'll continue to have.
You know what, let me let you finish and then I'll
Okay.
come back to my question.
Yep.
I don't want to sidetrack.
The middle one, the next one right above that. That's it. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So then the rest. This is just. This is about salary cost drivers. For just if you're not familiar with school salaries and how it works, the example is Unit A. We have step increases. We average step increases 4.5%. About 56% of the employees are in the very maximum step, so they don't get the step increase. But 56% of the employees is actually 63% of the cost because those are the highest paid employees, so they don't get the 4.5%. Then we have the column transfers when teachers go from a master's to a master's plus 5, so that costs us about $200,000 a year. And then we have the contract cost of living, which everyone in the contract gets is 3.25%. Then there's other increases, and that's just an example based on the teacher's contract. We have other contracts, but those are sort of the drivers that make up that 3.8% that we saw at the top. This looks at it sort of function by function. This is sort of how we present our budget to the DESE, and you can see that of the 11.6, we have 1 increase in district administration. All the rest is in the largest area, instructional services. You can see transportation and other things. And then the following slides, we presented it at school committee. They give detail on each one of those functions. I don't have to go through it, but if you want to go ahead and look at it.
Yeah, we don't need to look at that at this level, yeah.
But just know that, there's little descriptions about all the different areas and things that are going up and down. That's it.
Just at the beginning of this, I think you were talking about the number of positions, right? It was 584, and you mentioned at that point that those are in the operating budget, right? So that does not include Title I teachers who are federally funded.
Doesn't include some grants and some revolving funds, which I think we may have maybe another 15 positions that are between grants and revolving funds.
Yeah. So just the federal grants have been a topic of conversation recently, and so I just wanted to acknowledge that there's some
Uncertainty.
Yeah, there's some uncertainty, but there's also not. I mean, honestly, the federal government support for local school districts is a pretty small number, but it's not so small that if it went away, it wouldn't hurt
If
a
we
lot.
have the limitations of Prop 2.5, 15 positions is not actually going to hurt the average taxpayer all that much. The challenge is we have the limits of Prop 2.5.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not devastating. We're not going to lose 75 positions or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. That was my only question on that. I guess the other thing that we had said we were going to talk about a little bit tonight was the Medicaid reimbursements. That factors in because Medicaid plays into our local receipts, which we've been discussing earlier, and how does that all fit into this budget puzzle? and any, upcoming free cash requests that we are expecting in May town meeting, because that will also impact how much money is available. So curious if there's anything else anybody has to share on those things.
Yeah, obviously, just as an aside, we're trying to create systems where we can bring in more revenue through Mass Health. Obviously, for some of the things we have not been billing for multiple years now, which would include a possible speech and language pathologist that we want to put in the budget, as well as maybe fund 2 or 3 other positions that are already in the budget that could reduce the overall budget together. These guys have been working on this together. Sean, do you guys want to talk about the conversations you had today at all about the possibility of what we're looking for and how we might? I know we talked about revolving accounts. That might not be the best way to go about it.
I think just from a legal perspective, there's no revolving account that's appropriate for this type of revenue and expenditures.
Yep.
So I think what we've talked about is trying to figure out a way to look at our current Medicaid reimbursements and the revenue, that $350,000 number, and then that's the baseline. And so I kind of talked to Sean is, how much does it cost? What are you looking for in addition to the budget? Because I know there's a free cash ask of this product or this program. I think the thing to promote it as a kind of a business model. You're going to fund a couple of positions, but year 1 you're going to get some revenue. Year 2 that's going to be fully covered. I think that's the method, is kind of what Sean and I talked about this morning, is how do we present that? Because even if we give free cash at the end of the year, if that's left over, that's going back to free cash. It's not something that the schools can keep. There's no approved fund that's going to allow for that. So it's more off balance sheet, if you want to call it that way, of record keeping of, okay, these cost $350,000, but they're going to bring in 100 this year, 300 next year, whatever that's going to be. I think that's the case to present, and I'm not sure if that's what you're looking at.
Well, how would we create a mechanism to do that? I'm open to having conversations about, obviously, and I want to do that. Many school districts do use a revolving account, whether it's the legal way to do it or not, right? And we talked to DESE about it, and they said that happens all the time, and it's overlooked because that's just the way that schools and towns have had agreements. So so that's out there. That's not what I would suggest. I don't want to do anything that's not compliant with the law at all. I'm pretty legal that way. But any methodology that we can use, one of the possibilities for a warrant article that we were considering was to try to have $500,000 allocated, so then we could pay for those positions, and then we would obviously replenish that somehow with the Mass Health reimbursement that we got from those.
Kind of like a warrant article would be like the seed money, like with extended aid, like get the program running, and then hopefully by year 2 we would have an increase in our revenue. We're hoping to increase the revenue above the $350,000 so that would come in and then cover us. We just have to figure out a mechanism for how that could technically work.
It's just the foolish quirkiness that we have to deal with through our municipal finance laws. And sometimes there's a risk in asking DOR what the appropriate way to do it is, because they'll always say you can't do it that way. And their favorite line, or my favorite line of theirs, is the statute doesn't contemplate what you want to do. You'll remember Forbes, the statute doesn't contemplate what we want to do. I mean, there's all these stupid quirks out there. I mean, we found out we apparently never adopted the MGL that allows us to offer direct deposit. We asked a bunch of other towns. Most of them have done it, except 3 or 4 didn't. So now they're all in a panic about they never did it. Well, I don't know. We were asleep at the wheel in 1987 when we should have done it. So there's but we've been doing it for 40 years. So there's all these quirks. I think we can get there. There just needs to be a shared understanding of exactly what it is and how it's going to work. And our auditors will have to make sure they understand that. So 10 years from now, when nobody's here, somebody thinks, what is this and how did you, well, this is what everyone understood it. The legislative intent at town meeting needs to be clear. I've always leaned on, and DOR to a certain extent has, if town meeting approves something, that's the law we sort of are willing to go by. Our legislative body has said, we do this with the understanding that this is that. We're comfortable. Our auditors are never gonna have a problem with it, even if DOR decides to get difficult one year and say, you can't put Forbes money into an account for this, but you can just play a game where you move your money around and do it a different way. So,
So if you do this the way you're talking about, does that take it out of being a shared expense?
Or shared revenue.
Shared revenue, I mean?
Well, I think
Yeah.
that's what we're trying to figure
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
Essentially, it would, because and what a lot of other towns do is they actually are pulling in way more than we are, because they're able to, because they're then allocating that money to the group that's doing that work. Then it ends up replenishing itself with the personnel that are now putting in the extra hours billing, and so it's it would pull it out of the shared revenue,
All right.
but it would also increase.
Just so I'm clear, so you would pull the 350 out, you're talking about the 350 as well?
Well, yeah, because it would eventually, right, begin to come back into
Well,
the account.
Part of our conversation, there are administrative costs that you can bill for Mass Health now. That's pretty much what we're billing for now, and that's been going back to the town, right? That's how that's worked. The idea here is that now we would bill for direct services, right? So if a related service provider, speech language pathologist, a board certified behavior analyst,
Yeah.
occupational therapist, you're billing for them. And that additional fund is what we'd be looking for to fund the staff. I think
Okay.
we don't.
Well, to fund the staff, right, but I think what we'd always talked about is that 350,000 coming in is because we are directly providing services to students. Like, that money is directly being reimbursed for services to students. And so it would be what a lot of other towns, and I've talked to people in other towns, that's what they're doing, is they're putting it into a revolving fund that then funds specifically the services that are being provided, and then those personnel are then, they have more personnel who have the hours, who are able to bill more hours, and so they're actually pulling in probably like twice as much as we're pulling in, because we just don't have the personnel to do that. So it is something done in many other towns where
Yeah.
that is a standalone, almost like special education, where it's going back in to fund the things that it's actually being spent on.
I mean, I get that, but then again, I could use the argument that all the ambulance fees should
Excuse
stay
me.
with the fire department because they're the ones who generate the fees. So, it's
We would have
it's a
the
complicated
Taj
issue.
Mahal down there built. If
Yeah.
It doesn't even cover the cost. I think
That's like,
the
what they're
thought
talking
process,
about is absolutely ridiculous.
yeah, the thought would be, what beyond that can we do? Put up some money and can we get above that sort of base number? Because when you pull a number out of the local receipts, and you can do that, but then to Alan's point, to Bill's point, well, we don't do that with all the other things that generate revenue, and do we really want to, is there a value to that? If we can say we can generate an extra $400,000, we can, because the 8.5 million that we're offsetting the budget, let's face it, it'll be 9.5 by the time health insurance comes in, that just adds $400,000 to it. And that override we need in a year or two, it's just another $400,000 to it. If we think we can generate a couple $100,000 a year to cover some costs and add some costs, I think we should do that. If we have to put some free cash up to do it, I think that's fine. We can be a little entrepreneurial and say, hey, where would this be in a couple of years? We're generating an extra $300,000 and we're paying for $300,000 of staff costs. Maybe it's 2 new positions plus covering 2 existing positions. I think that's fine. When we start pulling revenues out of the general fund, not only is it sort of contrary to state law, but we're not doing anything for ourselves. We think we're helping ourselves because over here we're sort of like, yay, now we've got this extra money to spend on stuff, but then we're using more free cash to offset the budget. We're using more, the override is just bigger down the road. That $12 million override is now 12.4. Is there a value to that? If we can add revenue by adding staff and cover that cost and dump some things into it, fine. If it eventually generates $8 million a year, fine, let's do it. But anytime you're pulling anything off the general fund, we're just not helping ourselves short or long
No
term.
promises of $8 million a year.
Dream big, Tim. Dream
Yeah.
big.
I mean, they did just close the hospital school, so maybe we'll have lots of.
If we want to have a discussion on the governor and her choices in her budget, I'm all for staying here all night hours to have it.
Yeah.
Teresa, did you just raise a hand?
Yeah, thank you, Maya. I mean, I'm glad that we're all open and willing to work towards figuring this out, because I think this is the 3rd budget cycle we've been talking about it. And obviously, as we have different players on our staff, there's different things that are told. Matt Wells had an idea last spring that seems to be a little bit different than what we're talking about now. The year before that, Karen Sheridan and Meg LeMay were really close to an agreement. So speaking as a school committee member, just for myself, I don't know if Anne Marie agrees or not. But it feels like we keep getting close and then we don't act on it. I understand the legality. I mean, it's section 72, chapter 44 that really we have to look at. And it's that law that says the reimbursement of the Medicaid goes to the local government entity. And later on in that law, it specifically says that it will be considered unrestricted government aid. But as we had talked about last year, the school committee for the past 2 years has been very supportive of a bill that doesn't manifest, but I think we're going to support it again, that would actually change this and change that section of the law from the local government entity to the local educational authority, which then becomes the school committee. So we have written the past 2 years to John Rogers and Mike Resch, asking them to support those bills. We're talking about legislative advocacy again next week. I believe the school committee is still going to be advocating for that. And already regional school districts, this money goes right to those school committees. So I have to believe there's a way it can be done.
Okay.
All right, so I think on that, that was just kind of like a, there's nothing to do right now, no action to take. I don't even think that this group has any, the BBC has any authority over this particular thing. But I think that because it fits into what are we talking about for local receipts, what are we talking about for needs of free cash and all that kind of stuff. I just wanted to get all of this kind of out and everybody could be aware.
And we still need to have continued conversations on how to make it work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I tell you, I can represent the frustrated people in town. This is craziness. It's thinking that you're gonna take all this free cash and spend it towards operating budgets is the worst financial policy you could ever do. It's just nuts. It's not done to this extent anywhere, and it shouldn't be. And DOR and everybody else will tell you that. The idea of, well, we have the money, so we don't want to cut the services. Well, 3 years from now, 2 years from now, you're not going to have that free cash because you spent it. And I can tell you right now, if it was today, attitudes change, but it's today, you're not getting that override. So what are you doing? So what you should be doing is cutting back as much as you possibly can so you can stretch out that free cash and get 5 years out of it, not 2 years. Yeah, you might have to do with a little less today, but that's life. We all have to do that at home too. And it's time for the people in this town, running this town, to realize that. You can't just keep going back to the taxpayer and asking for more and more and more. They've had it. And 20 million sounds like a lot of money. There's plenty of other towns, you go right on DOR's website and see, that have that amount of money every year, but they don't touch it. Because it's there to keep the town financially secure and to keep its bond rating down, so when they do have to do borrowing, it's a lower interest rate. And yet in this town, we're talking about squandering it, just spending it away. It's crazy. People have to get real about this budget process.
Well, one of the things I know I'd like to do, Bill, with the free cash, this town meeting is put some money away for something, whether it's the regular stabilization fund, whether it's a capital fund, so we can fund some capital projects. Because to me,
but that's all right.
I
get your point.
But I mean, put money away for some kind of future use, because in a year when you generate $25–30 million of free cash, which is a very unusual year, you're not going to see that all the time. I think a significant amount of money should go towards looking towards the future rather than just going towards annual budgets.
Another reason the average Joe out there, and you weren't here, so I'm not yelling at you.
Well, I yell at him all the time. I blame him for everything that's happened up until now.
But you want to look at the avenues to create a nice solid foundation so you don't have to keep coming back and whacking the taxpayer. That's exactly what the override was. And that was the promise of the override. And here we are, saying we're nowhere near. Not that we need a little, not that we can only stretch it out 5 years, but that we still have to get a foundation. What's happened in the last 5 years? Nothing.
Well,
And who's
COVID, I mean, like, I hear you, and I think that the override was to get us to where we should have been, where we were lagging so far behind, and we really did believe at that time that that's all we needed. And then COVID hit, and the inflation, the massive inflation that
we
we've
kept
gotten.
giving you more. We never got any of that back. Just kept spending it.
And it's been going up and up and up, and all the costs and the different population shifts. And I mean, I would argue even just, it's not just the schools, it's all the services in the town. The population shift and Tony talked about like the fire calls. Like, I mean, obviously we know the volume of police calls, like all the different types of them. It's been a huge shift, an unforeseeable shift in the last 5 years that no one really thought was going to happen. And I'm not trying to, justify, because I pay taxes in this town too. I don't want to keep seeing my taxes go up. It becomes unsustainable. But I think we didn't see that. We really did believe that override was gonna be that foundation that we didn't need to, jump off of. and continually keep coming back and hitting
right.
it.
I mean, at that time, we knew that it wouldn't last forever.
Wouldn't last
we
forever,
knew that there was
but
a good chance that
we were like,
in
this is
like
gonna-
7 or 8 years, we'd be asking for more. But I, at that time, thought like maybe another couple million, not like 10 or 12 million.
And I mean,
you know, that.
nobody's been more surprised than even us when we come back every year for the budget. We're like, oh my god! Like even we're like, we have to ask for what? Like it's because and some of these costs are just costs that we cannot control. Like we talk about trash, we talk about special education, and sometimes it's a cost we cannot control. We're going back to the bus contract, like. They're going to charge us what they're going to charge us. There's no one else we can ask. There are no other bus companies.
Yeah, I mean, my concern is that at some point we're going to have to go to the voters for a number. And my concern is that if the number is too high, the voters just
say no.
hit it, they're going to say no.
Yep.
And then where are we? So I think what we really have to do is understand that we do have needs, but on the other hand, the voters have needs too. We're going to have to go back to them. What numbers can we come up with that, to the greatest extent possible, not perfect, satisfies your needs, and we can, with a straight face, go to the voters and say, we did all we could, here's the number. You make the call.
Teresa?
Yeah, thank you. No, I hear what you're saying, Alan. I hear what you're saying, Bill. I'm really defensive, though, of history and what has happened, because currently I'm the only one on the school committee who was on the school committee pre-override, during override, and post-override. And some things that were just said are absolutely not accurate. There have been times that the school district asked for money and then gave it back as we promised. So the first example of that was when COVID hit. So the fall of 2020, when we needed to figure out how to get our kids back in school, and we ran a very successful remote learning academy and a hybrid academy that received accolades from DESE as one of the best in the state. And we asked at that time, and Maya and Anne-Marie, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was like $350,000 or $400,000 to get that remote learning academy off the ground. And we said, if we don't need it, we'll give it back. We gave it back in May. We gave every penny back. Another time that we asked for money and we gave it back because we didn't need it, as we promised we would, was 2 budget cycles ago when we had the supplemental budget, when the out-of-district tuition went up 14% and our special education needs, to Anne's point, higher than we could have predicted. We asked for money from town meeting in a warrant article. FinCom, thank you, supported that. And then we promised we would give back what we didn't spend, and we did. So for anybody to say the schools take and never give back, that is not accurate, and I need that documented. That is not accurate. The other thing that I feel very protective about in my role and for the school district is the role in the school committee is a little bit different in terms of our fiscal authority and our purview. Because yes, we have a responsibility to this operating budget that we're talking about tonight, but we also have the responsibility to oversee grants and donations and title money and Medicaid reimbursement and Chapter 70 and circuit breaker and so many other things that, no disrespect, but I think if you're not on or haven't been on the school committee, you don't understand. And part of what we are desperately trying to do, and we are so transparent, watch our meetings, ask for our material, come to our budget subcommittees that we have like every week. What we are trying to do, and as Kim was talking about, we are trying to move money out of the operating budget that comes from the taxpayers and put it in grants, put it in Medicaid, put it in title money. But we as a school committee can't plan. We can't plan, we can't be responsible, we can't support our administration's goals, and we can't support our students' needs if we don't know if we're getting a certain amount of money of that Medicaid reimbursement. And the last thing that I feel really defensive about is how we talk about the Medicaid reimbursement. Yes, it is free cash, but it is free cash that was directly generated from services the schools provided. So I just needed to say those things.
If I could, just to Alan's point earlier, about looking at the next override and what that number is, there's no magic number, right? There's no polling you could do that say people will accept 11.9 but not 11.6. In terms of a dollar amount as a percentage of the tax base, though, we're still looking at something that's consistent with the last override. And I think that's important to keep in mind. And not to say that that's a bar or a ceiling or a floor, but the increase in the tax base in the 2020 override or 2019 override versus where we think we'll be in a few years. I think if you look at it as a percentage increase on the tax base, which is what people will feel, those numbers are fairly similar. It may not be exactly the same. I don't want somebody to say, hey, it was 8.1 before and now it's 8.7, therefore it's fundamentally out of whack. There's no science to that. But just as a percentage increase to the tax base, we're still roughly in that same realm. Now that provides no relief to the taxpayer,
Yeah, it adds.
but just in terms of how much the tax levy has to grow to get us to balance, if we're roughly where we were 7 years ago, it shows that we're growing at a certain pace. Maybe that pace is too high, but it's roughly where we were before. So it's just important to keep that in the context of the impact of the tax base and the size of what the
But
override is.
I think it's really important to remember that we are in a very different situation than we were when we did that last override. And let me finish, okay?
Sure.
So the ways in which we're in a different situation, most importantly, that was our first operational override. It was very easy to tell the taxpayer, like, look, most other towns started doing this 30 years ago. We've never asked you for this. We need a reset, a new floor. Mm-hmm. And people understood that. And also, when we did that override, we had significant hits to services, right? Like we had been doing, I was on the school committee then. We had been playing games with like, we're gonna have to increase these fees and we're gonna like cut this position and we're gonna, like we had seen service cuts, right? And then we were, yes, we were making everyone aware, like, look, if this doesn't pass, there's gonna be even more draconian cuts. But everybody understood we were all at a rough place to begin with. It was not hard to convince people that our students did not have as much as students in neighboring towns. And so that was a very different reality. And the other big reality is that at that point we had not had a recent override for a middle school. And we were not talking about some of the other things that were coming up and were going to be hitting the taxpayer potentially. So I think if you were to go out now, it would be a much harder sell to sell the same percentage as what we did then, because there were so many other factors.
Sure, understandable, but just in the context of how much it's costing us, that's still the impact of the tax base is similar. That's roughly what we need. If Prop 2.5 was Prop 3.5, now all that means is property taxes would be higher than they are today. But if it was Prop 3.5, we'd be looking at a minimal override, or we'd be looking at needing $3 million to offset the budget. We'd say, wow, with all this free cash, we could get 8 or 9 or 10 years of stability. I'm not saying we want to, not that we could get rid of Prop 2.5 at the local level. I'm not saying we want to get rid of it because that would just lead to higher taxes. But fundamentally, that imbalance that we have is not realistically unreasonable.
I think that the sell at this point too, for at least from the school sides, in my perspective, is that we don't ever want to go back there.
Right.
And it was, I can say that very clearly, the stark contrast, of going to school here almost 30 years ago, graduating here, and then sending my daughter, through the school 20 years later, the stark differences and what we needed to vote. We don't want to go back there. And I think that's my argument about the past 5 years. Yes, we needed that ceiling, we needed that reset, we needed that, new level. But then we had unprecedented, changes and shifts in demographics and shifts in student populations and unprecedented, just increases in costs that we just have never seen in a very short amount of time. And now what we don't want to do, we have to pay them. There are things we have to pay. And we don't want to start going back to where we were shortchanging our general education population because we have to pay for this, for the special education, for the, or just special services. I mean, I just put big, broader student services, anything that we have that is a mandate from the federal government or the state government to pay for. And what we had started to do is shortchange the rest of the student population to get there. And we don't want to do that again. That's the sell at this point, is that, well, that's where we're headed if we don't, but it is going to be a hard sell, a very, very hard sell, because there's a significant population of this town that doesn't have a student in the district, in the schools at all. And they're like, well, so what? I don't care.
And I can't press enough, the more you shortchange, and I'm not saying that it has been shortchanged, I just want to make that really clear, but the more you shortchange the general education side of things, the increase to special ed goes up, because it does become the only game in town, so to speak.
Right.
Right, and then the complexity is, well, we can't get this, so now we're going to go to special ed, and those those things happen, and that's where the out-of-district costs go, but that's what happens, so.
Just don't tell us you're turning the Queen Mary. We could talk about this all night. Just the average home price is 50% higher than it was at the last override. That means nothing other than, to Emery's point, we're in a different situation. The world is different than it was 6 years ago. If the pandemic hadn't happened, if prices hadn't gone quick, who knows where we would end up being. So it's there's no easy solutions.
Now,
The
one
world's
thing.
different than it was, which is a reason we have to do things different than we used to.
But
I'm not trying to say, yeah, I'm sorry. I don't want to make that sound like, well, tough crap. We're gonna have to just, but like, I don't,
No,
or
just
we need to
I'm
tighten.
not pointing just.
Yeah,
at the
no, I know.
schools.
We need to, I know we all need to look at things differently, and I think that, as a matter of fact, I've been really excited about, Tim and Sean coming in and really have like a fresh set of eyes on the schools and on the budgets and really looking at those things. So I don't disagree with you on that at all, and I don't want to make it sound like I'm trying to disagree with you on that point, because we can't just keep spending everything all the time. I get it.
Right. But one thing I do want to say is I think we all collectively want to maximize any revenue sources other than the taxpayer, right? The local taxpayer. And so I would really love to see the schools, look for more Medicaid reimbursement and support that. And I do agree that, paying for a couple of people to help with managing that may be a very smart investment, right? It's similar to paying for a grant writer, right? They often pay for themselves and more, right? Like, that's not a bad idea. So, but I don't think we should get too hung up on this whole idea of a revolving fund or whatever. Like, it has to be a formal mechanism that goes directly back to the schools, and that you guys aren't going to do it unless you know that it's all going back to the schools. I feel that we have historically had agreements in the budget balancing committee, like, look, this is how we're going to divvy up money.
If we could do it better, we should do it better.
Right, and so if there's a way that you want to say, like, look, let's have an understanding that when we approach a new budget cycle, we say, like, okay, well, let's make sure that money gets directly allocated to the schools, and then we figure this out. But it still counts as general revenue, and it just factors into how we give the money to the schools. So I hate the idea that we're saying, like, we've been wanting to do this for 3 years, but we haven't because we haven't, like, dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. Like, let's just find a way to bring in as much revenue as possible.
I agree.
So you said the next information, I think, might be February 15th. But if we wait for that, which we could, because we need that information, but after that, aren't we right into like school vacation? How do we keep the meeting going?
Did we have a February 6th meeting scheduled?
I had something on my calendar for February 6th,
So
and I was
don't
like,
know why, but
did we mean that for this year, or
I
did
think we
we?
were just trying to guess.
Or did I, like, somehow, like,
We were
have a
guessing,
repeat
saying
from
we can,
I mean,
can cancel if we need to,
what
but
week
yeah.
is February
let's have
vacation?
something scheduled.
February 20th?
I
That,
have a
like,
February 6th meeting in my calendar.
yeah.
2 to 4? But Sarah's on that.
5 to 6:30.
Is the
No,
FinCom
that's-
meeting the 3rd? I
that's
mean, we need a
budget
couple of
sub.
weeks.
Never
So
mind.
And 5 to
That's
6.
budget sub, but
do we want to say tentatively the 6th? I
yeah.
don't want to kick it out a week. I just don't want the GIC to come
That's
out.
the right
I mean,
invite
we'll
list.
be more or less. If we don't have a GIC number by the 6th, I mean, it might be that we'll send out whatever update we have, and it may be that we're walking into the meeting on the 6th with our final GIC numbers, but that might be where we could say, okay, what's our comfort level with that level of free cash?
And what was the 15th?
I think the FinCom's meeting on the 15th or the 13th?
13th.
We're
The
meeting on the
13th.
13th, and then
The following week's school vacation.
the following week's school vacation.
I thought so, that's what you said in
And I think the
Charles.
11th, the board will be looking at a preliminary, I mean, you'll get a general government budget Friday, minus some auditing. By then, we should, I mean, the governor's number never changes dramatically, right? Like, it could go up or down 100 or 200 grand, but it never changes dramatically. It's really waiting to see if we get completely croaked on the pension and just a final health insurance number, which we've been promised at the GIC's February meeting, which should be before on the 6th. So if we want to hold the 6th, if it's not the 6th though, would we kick it to the following week? But the FinCom's meeting, does FinCom want to meet school vacation?
That's good.
FinCom's meeting at 6 p.m. on the 13th, but we were planning that budget balancing was going to be at 5 on the 6th. So I don't love to have it that close, and I think we have a couple of appearances on the 13th. So we can't really delay the the
So
time of
the-
the FinCom meeting?
The GIC is meeting on the 6th, so it just might be, I mean, look at the number, if it's not 8%, it's gonna be 11%. So I mean, it's, knock on wood, nobody hold me to it. It's not gonna inadvertently go up 27%, at which point we're, declaring.
We're talking
bankruptcy or
on the
something.
margins right now, when everything is said
Right,
and
but,
done.
8.5 million of free cash versus 10.5 million of free cash, that's a lot, in a sense. So I think we're gonna wanna know, but if we do the 6th, I think we'll know what the GIC number is, we can do a quick run on our plan count, and know going into the 6th roughly at this general government number, at this school number, at these reasonably certain fixed costs, this is the offset amount, and then we can discuss
Do we
that.
have a
But I
time for
think-
February 6th?
But I think
5 p.m.
what my point was that, we assumed 8% for health insurance, unless it goes up to 12 or 15%, whether it goes up to 9% and 10% isn't gonna make that much difference.
Yeah, but 8.5 to 10 million, I think, is still a big deal.
Oh,
'cause
well,
we talked
yeah,
about that
well,
amount of free cash.
right,
If we
but
were
I don't think
balanced,
it
and we said,
shouldn't
look, we
come
might
to that,
use $1
just
billion
based.
of our 20 million of free cash, we'd say whatever.
Well,
so
but
we
it shouldn't
do.
come to that just simply based on GIC is what I'm saying.
No, but
Unless
then
you-
remember,
unless
it's
you
a
get a
$20
huge
million
number.
line item going
I know.
up 8%, all of a sudden going up 10%, that's.
No, it's a couple $100,000, I get that,
And unfortunately, the pension number's in the hole because people are living longer, so.
Sorry. And I just said to, who did I say to, on the way in here, made it this far through the, gonna go the rest of the way.
Okay.
All right.
6th, and we'll get up updated numbers once we hear from the GIC.
Yeah. Jeff, can you share your updated spreadsheets with all of us?
Yes, I'm out tomorrow, but early next week I'll have it.
Okay.
Okay.
Good.
I don't think there's anything in particular we wanted from the schools. I mean, I emailed you guys about FinCom requests for the schools, but, all right, so if there's nothing else we want to talk about, then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, we're gonna say Teresa said aye, so we're gonna go with that. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.